Welcome. Ready to step beyond the ordinary and elevate your expertise? Get ready to listen, learn, and earn your CE hours. This podcast features content from an accredited activity provided by Colibri Healthcare. Before we dive into today's topic, please take a quick moment to visit elitelearning.com/podcasts for accreditation and disclosure statements. You will also find simple step-by-step instructions on how you can claim your valuable CE credits for this episode. Let us get started.
Welcome to the Elite Nursing Podcast. I'm Dr. MacKenzie Butler, and today I'm here with Donna Cardillo, the Inspiration Nurse. She truly needs no introduction because she is a legend here. But Donna, tell us, how did you become the Inspiration Nurse in your journey truly to becoming the original nurse influencer?
Well, thank you, MacKenzie. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. And I'd love to tell you a little about my journey. When I got out of nursing school, like most nurses, I envisioned myself picking a clinical specialty, finding a job, and then being there for the rest of my profession or rest of my career, which is what many nurses think. But I had gotten married, moved to a different part of the state, and I had to find another job in my new location. So I was looking for emergency room jobs, but I couldn't find a shift that I wanted. So I was kind of forced to look into other possibilities. And I used the classified ads at the time, and I saw an opportunity in a medical weight control center. And I went on an interview. I didn't really know a lot about it, but you can't really learn what's going to happen at a job or what it's about unless you go on the interview, which is a big lesson I learned. I wound up getting hired as the head nurse there. And once I was in that position, so here I was transitioning into ambulatory care nursing before I even knew what ambulatory care nursing was. And once I started in that position, I began to learn a lot about myself as a nurse, all the transferable skills I had as a nurse. I started to learn about the business of healthcare, which was new to me, and what some of the possibilities were out there. So I had a series of non-traditional jobs. One thing led me to another, None of it was ever planned. It was a matter of kind of where the road led me. And then about 30 years ago, I realized that the average nurse wasn't aware of all the opportunities that are out there for them beyond that traditional hospital bedside role, but they also didn't know how to market themselves. And so I thought, gee, maybe someday I can teach nurses about those things based on my own experience, but also on my own research as I was learning those things. And that's how I come to be here today.
That is fantastic. And I'm glad somebody was thinking about marketing and nursing, because that's nothing we ever learn in school. And as a nurse myself, I think the hang up has always been, well, I'm just a nurse. Like, what's there to say? So tell me more about how you broke out of that and like moved through the imposter syndrome of it all.
Yeah, so that's a really big question there. At the time, I wasn't so much thinking about the imposter syndrome, which I'll get to, but I was learning that, when you show up in a hospital years ago, you kind of just had to say, I'm a registered nurse, here's my license, and they would hire you on the spot. We really didn't need to think about marketing at one point in time. But now that I was going out for other job interviews in different types of settings, people were asking me about, what are your good points, what are you lacking? Tell me about a time you had a problem on a job that you had to solve. I thought, oh my gosh, I never got asked these questions before. I did have to learn how to respond to those. And there was already lots of books and printed material about all of that. So I was kind of learning as I went to interview on those positions. I was a little bit adventurous with my career. And what I mean by that is I would often apply for a job and go on an interview, even though I wasn't 100% sure what was all involved. But I learned early on that you really have to go on that interview to find out what the job is about. And sometimes you might apply for one job, and if the employer is impressed with you, you may actually get hired into another even better position. That happened to me several times in my career because there's often unadvertised positions within that company. So much of what I learned about other opportunities and about marketing myself were from my own personal experience, but doing a little self-study on the side as well.
That's really cool. It's like use these opportunities of interviews and trying new things that maybe you didn't know a ton about, but it sounds like it taught you a lot about you. And so what skill sets do you think you pulled from, what we'd call traditional nursing, which we know isn't really a thing, but what do you think you pulled forward and that other nurses who are just starting to dabble can pull forward for themselves?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned earlier how a lot of nurses say, I'm just a nurse, and have that that image of just being a nurse at the bedside, just having that clinical skill set and knowledge, and that's really who we are and what we do. And that is the foundation of our practice, but we are so much more than that. Also, there are so many different ways and places to have a positive impact in healthcare. There are direct and indirect ways. So again, the more I got out into different positions, not only was I learning additional skills, but I was getting feedback from people. Maybe sometimes good and bad, but that's what you want. You want to know what your strengths are, but you also want to know what maybe you need to do some work on, things you need to polish up or whatever. So I was getting some of that feedback from coworkers, from clients, from employers, and that was very helpful to me because I thought, all right, I can pump up what I seem to have a natural gift for, and I need to do some work on those areas that still need work. And trust me, there were a lot of areas that needed work. There still are.
I can relate, but it sounds like you were able to leverage these to really be able to see yourself through different lenses of, I think we're really good at seeing ourselves, our strengths and weaknesses, but utilizing your interview process. But you said you applied and tried out a lot of different roles that maybe you didn't know what they were. What would you recommend for nurses today to gain exposure? Because I hear a lot of nurses like, well, there's no jobs at my hospital.
Right, absolutely. So nurses, even back then, but still today, we have a great body of knowledge and skill that is very marketable and very transferable into all areas. Some prospective employers recognize that, others don't. I started to develop a very expanded view of who a nurse is and what a nurse does. So any interview I went on, before I went on the interview, I would think about how my nursing background would be an asset to that employer, and I would present that to them. And they may or may not have thought about that before, but I had to be able to articulate that to them. Like, why should I hire a nurse for this position? I got so good at that everybody I met, no matter what industry they were in, I started asking them if they had a nurse working for their company, and if they said no, I'd give them a reason why they should. So, I remember meeting a man once who was a manager at a sneaker store. I said, do you have any nurses working at the store? He said, no, why would we? I said, well, nurses are health experts. I said, you could have nurses there checking blood pressures as an asset to pull people in. He says, oh gosh, that sounds interesting. Do you know anybody that might be interested in that? So
look at you, just like
always expanding opportunities.
Yes, who would have thought of that? Like, who would have thought of that? I absolutely love that. So in today's age, I know we talked a little bit about like leveraging social media as a nurse as maybe like an intro pathway. Can you talk a little bit about that and where to start?
Yeah, so the internet, I had to learn how to use things, and when I was started in my business, I absolutely had to learn how to use social media well, because that's just part of today's life, and that's how people market. So other than the obvious ways of setting up a LinkedIn or a Facebook profile, I met a woman through business who was a social media consultant who actually taught business owners or job seekers how to best use social media platforms and leverage it to their highest advantage. And that is something that I needed to learn. So I did work with her, and I learned a lot when I got myself originally on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook. I remember Twitter years ago, which we now call X, seemed like a foreign planet, and a lot of people were saying, oh, there's a lot of nonsense there. Well, there's always nonsense on social media, but there's a lot of really important stuff going on out there. Community, connection, breaking news, research. People often say to me, Donna, how do you keep up on all of this information? I said, believe it or not, a lot of it is from social media. I don't spend my day on social media. I spend maybe 30 minutes a day on social media, but I get so much from that.
Yeah, the connection and just hearing like what's happening and
Yes.
who's out there. So thinking again just about LinkedIn, I know there's a ton of nurses who really don't utilize it. Like I just kind of started using LinkedIn, and part of it is like, I'm just a nurse, again, just a
Yeah,
nurse. Who wants to hear from me? So how do you break through, again, like we were talking about the imposter syndrome, and what were maybe some like top things that you would want somebody to have on their profile, or even in their resume, putting those things out there?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is a very important social media platform for all professional people, and that includes nurses. And there is a misunderstanding by many nurses that LinkedIn is a job site. It is not. It is a professional networking site, and it is really an online professional portfolio. So when you meet someone through various channels online at a networking event, certainly if you apply for a position, or maybe you're looking for a new client if you have a business, people have a natural tendency to then go to LinkedIn. That's not cyber stalking, but they want to learn more about you, and they get an opportunity to see more about your background. LinkedIn is also an amazing place to create your professional community. There's an enormous nursing and healthcare community there. We don't have to, and we don't want to network only with other nurses, but I have an enormous nursing community there. We don't communicate back and forth every day, but I am posting things just about every day on LinkedIn, information that I'm sharing, a whole variety of things. I mean, I have a whole strategy that I use because I have a business and because I want to. First of all, I am definitely trying to keep nurses uplifted and positive and moving forward and giving them tips and advice for living their best life and having a full career. But there's a lot of different things that I'm doing there. We even have a little fun on social media every now and then. So I recommend that every nurse not only have a LinkedIn profile, but you have to develop that profile. You can't just have a profile that only has your name on it, that doesn't have a picture or any other information. That's like a ghost profile. So
Yes.
You might as well not even have that. But rather than not have it, put a picture up. It's relatively easy, but if for any reason you're intimidated, you just have to ask 5 people in your world that are out there, and they will be able to help you set up that LinkedIn profile. If someone were to apply, when nurses apply for a position, it is very probable that whoever receives that resume initially, perhaps before they even talk, is going to go to LinkedIn to see what's there. And if there's nothing there, or there's outdated information, is really bad. You know, if it says something, I mean, that doesn't even exist anymore, that you worked for I don't know what. So it's very important. It's an important marketing tool. It's an important networking tool and community building.
Yeah, and it sounds like a great way to access some of those roles that are what we would consider non-traditional. Are there other arenas that you recommend to look into to kind of maybe break out of what we would consider like the bedside traditional roles?
Yeah. So nurses need to get out more for the most part. Traditionally, nurses have been very isolated. They get isolated in their place of employment and their specialty, and that kind of becomes their whole world. They lose the big picture. They lose connection to the bigger community of nursing. So there are certainly opportunities to build community online, but that will never replace some occasional face-to-face, in-person networking. So you don't have to travel to another part of the country. Getting out to local career fairs or a local chapter of a professional association. I'm surprised at how many nurses do not belong to any nursing associations. That's how we build community in nursing. Without community, we may survive, but we will never thrive. I'm talking about individuals. But perhaps as a profession as well, because when our associations are strong, our practice is strong. When our practice is strong, our associations are strong. You don't have to even belong to an association. If you want to get out to a local chapter meeting, you can go as a guest.
Oh, cool.
So I'm trying to make it easy for your audience. In other words, you don't belong to anything, you haven't been out to anything in a while. Look to see who's having some meetings in your local area. Sign up. You might have to pay a little something for lunch or dinner. And, go and meet some people and get yourself out there. When you go out to these association meetings and you talk to people, you find out what other people are doing. That's kind of how you find out about it. And most nurses are shy networkers. Most humans are shy networkers. But you put yourself out there. You introduce yourself. You give a little information, and then you ask people a little something about themselves. And you get better at it with practice. It becomes more comfortable.
Well, it sounds like you were able to put yourself in a lot of different situations, especially since you've grown and evolved. So tell me, what were some things that you did for yourself to really break through and put yourself out there in these new situations?
So sometimes people think I was brimming with confidence and courage when I got myself out there. It was actually the complete opposite. I was never feeling confident or courageous or any of those things, but when I needed some type of a position or I was interested in doing something different, maybe I was getting bored or my previous position just didn't suit me anymore, I would just put myself out there and I would do the best that I could and then see what happened out there afterwards. In terms of networking, I didn't really start networking in earnest until I started my education business. One smart thing I did when I started the business, I read all the books about the experts about how to succeed in business. All of them said you've got to network, network, network. You have to meet people, you have to get out. I was a very unconfident networker in the beginning. I didn't even have a decent business outfit to wear at the time. So I wore the same red dress that I had to everything and hoped I wouldn't run into the same people when I was out there. But I started to just slowly get myself out there into the world because I knew I had to break through that sense of isolation. And MacKenzie, during the pandemic, many nurses and others became even more isolated than we were before. And a lot of people are still nervous about getting out into the world full blast.
You're very right.
So I say it's time to do that.
It is. It's time to take that next best step and start, like you said, it doesn't have to be a huge thing, but out in your community and engaging. Right. Will you tell us more about, so entrepreneurialism isn't something you hear a lot about from nurses. So tell us, how did you get in there, and what were your first steps?
So I had this idea, as I mentioned earlier, about teaching nurses about non-traditional career opportunities and how to market themselves. And as I recall, because I think I pushed a lot of this away already, I did reach out to a couple of companies, and I don't remember if they were education or continuing ed companies. I did reach out to a couple of companies to see if they might be interested in, there were seminar companies back then where you could put together a program and then they would market it and send you out there. So I reached out to a couple of those in the beginning. I told them about my idea to see if they were interested in working with me, and nobody seemed to be interested in what I was doing. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I guess I'm going to have to do this by myself. I researched to the best of my ability. The internet was not big in the mid-1990s, if it was even really out there much. I went to the good old public library and I got any books out that I could on how to run a seminar. There was very little in print at the time, but I found a little something or other. I also studied how to be a better speaker. And because I learned there's a lot of technique to public speaking, it's not just something you automatically get better at with practice. And then I began to research what I wanted to teach. I started to, even though I knew a lot about what nursing had to offer, I started to interview nurses who worked in every specialty on the planet that I could think of. And how did I find them? I would ask somebody, do you know anybody? I remember, for example, I know that nurses do emergency transport on helicopters and whatnot. So I called a company that did emergency transport and I asked if they had any nurses that worked there that I could interview. And in fact, somebody did get on the phone with me and I had trouble getting off the phone with him. He wanted to so give me information, which was so generous. But, and was that easy for me to pick up the phone? No, absolutely not, but I needed to learn, so I did what I had to do.
So the imposter syndrome, let's get into it. Tell me more about, how did you break through that?
So the imposter syndrome, first of all, I don't even think I knew what imposter syndrome was. I'm sure I didn't until the last, I don't know how many, couple of decades. When I became a nurse educator, I had to start doing a lot of studying, reading, and I learned a lot of things. I learned a lot of things that maybe I had experienced in life, but I didn't really have a name for them. So imposter syndrome it's not a real disorder, but it's something that many people feel, especially women, but men as well, who have achieved a lot in their life and somehow feel that they're a fraud at that level. Like, oh, everybody's giving me accolades and they think I'm doing this well, or that I'm very good, but they don't really know me because we are not always able to see ourselves in that way. So that's where the imposter syndrome comes in. I remember reading a quote by Maya Angelou years ago, and Maya Angelou and many famous people have had imposter syndrome. She said, I've written 11 books, but I always think the next book I write, they're going to find me out. They're going to find out who I really am and that I'm, really a fraud. I mean, I'm not quoting her exactly, obviously, but I thought, if Maya Angelou has imposter syndrome, I can have it too, and whoever else. So it's always that feeling that no matter how much we achieve or how far we go in life, we feel that we're not really that person that other people think that we are. So first of all, it's important to recognize it and name it and put it out there. I think when we understand that it is a real syndrome, and there's a name for it, and that 70 to 80% of the population experience it, that would make me feel a little better. Okay, well, it's not just me, it's a lot of people out there. And I certainly experienced that every single step of the way. The very first time I got up and did my first seminar and spoke for 6 hours, and I'd never spoken that long, I remember thinking, who am I to think that I've got 6 hours worth of material to give these 25 nurses that actually paid something to come and hear me speak that day? And I realized I was so nervous that first time, I thought I can either give everybody their money back and just, completely ruin my career and my business or whatever, or I could go up front in front of this room and, do what I came here to do today and see what happens. And what I told myself at the end of the day was, I didn't even want to look at the evaluations right away because I thought, I'm not even going to focus on that yet. I want to focus on the fact that I just did what I did. That was pretty huge, that I actually got people to come. I spoke for 6 hours. I gave it my best shot. I had no PowerPoint. I had no jokes. I had no stories. I think I spoke in monotone for 6 hours that first day. Fortunately, nobody left, in the middle of the day. But I thought if it didn't work out well, I could always change the program. I could somehow get better or I could make it better. So I kept stepping a little further out into the world. And again, the more I experienced, the more people I met, the more opportunities I had, the easier it was for me to be out there in the world. When I told you I was a shy networker 30 years ago, I could walk in almost anywhere today and network with almost anyone. Part of it is from experience, but part of it is the body of experience that I bring with me from 30 years. I also got a graduate degree over the last 30 years, and having that level of higher education also helped to boost my confidence as well. I was already self-employed when I went to graduate school, and people were saying, why are you going back to school? You already have a successful business. I said, it's something I want to do for myself, and graduate school, as an example, helped me to learn more about myself, the world around me, and how I could fit in the world around me. I mean, that's just one of many things.
I really love that the access to education, especially as nurses, is amazing. I will say, though, even though I have my doctorate, I have been experiencing a little bit of imposter syndrome here today.
I'm not surprised.
And I just love being able to lean into your confidence. And that's, truly how I've been navigating through. I'm like, I am here with Donna, folks. So thank you so much for sharing more about that. Are there any other key things that you're like, I wish I would have known this when I first started out or broke away from traditional nursing?
Yeah, I really want nurses to know that their career does not have to be a straight line, that there is not one right path for all nurses to follow. I was led to believe that in school, that as I said, you pick a specialty and that's where you stay. My first job out of nursing school was actually in a psychiatric hospital, and everybody told me I could not work in a psych hospital, that I would forget my skills. I don't think I had any skills just yet as a new nurse, but there was an opportunity. I always tell nurses to follow the opportunity. If a position, an opportunity sounds interesting, don't try to figure out whether, you can't know whether it's going to work for you or not, but take a chance. If you see something there as an opportunity to learn, because you never know. You can see on the surface what you're probably going to do and learn, but you're never going to know until you're on the inside what you're actually going to learn and where you're going to go from there. Also, years ago, the old model of nursing was you picked a specialty, you stayed there forever. People still ask students and new nurses today, what specialty are you going to work in? And they're like, oh, I don't know. You don't have to pick a specialty. You follow the opportunities and you find out what works for you. Those opportunities don't have to be in the hospital. They don't have to be in medical surgical nursing. Nothing wrong with that. Medical surgical nursing is a specialty just like every other specialty. It's not generic nursing. It's not for every nurse, though. Every nurse is different. We come with different energy, different personality, different interests, different career goals. We have a lot of nurses coming into the profession today, second, third, and fourth careers, and they bring with them a whole host of interesting, not only experience, but some of them have graduate degrees, doctoral degrees. It's fascinating. So the world of nursing is expanding, but those of us practicing nursing is also expanding. So everything is changing. I always advise nurses, carve out your own path in nursing, make it your own.
There really isn't a traditional path anymore, which is really beautiful. And like you said, it
But
should
many
be
people will tell you that there is.
correct. And how do we change that language? Like you said, I think a nurse's career is as unique as they are as a person. But I think there's this like mold we're working to break through. Any tips on that?
Yeah, a lot of nurses, this is very typical, see their identity in one way, that they're nurses at the bedside in the hospital. Because if you leave the hospital environment and you say to people out in the world, where do you work? And they say, what hospital do you work in?
Always.
So if you don't work in a hospital, they say, why did you leave nursing? I've been getting that question forever. I say, my answer is, I've never left nursing. I am just as much a nurse today as I was when I worked in the emergency department. I am still a healer, a nurturer, all of those things. I heal with words today. So I'm always trying to expand people's vision, including other nurses, of who we are and of what we do. And so how can we change that, which was your question? I speak about it and write about it. I'm only one person, though. So it's important for those of us that do know and have done different things, yourself included, to get out there in different ways and have conversations. I wrote an article a few years ago, Why Nurses Need an Elevator Speech, about how to introduce yourself when you're out there. But a lot of nurses will just say, I'm a nurse, but that's very bland, generic, nondescript. We all do something very, very different and interesting. So that's important.
And we bring a different blend of experience. One, even if you're a med-surg nurse, that could be vastly different depending on where you are and what you did before.
Yes.
And so I just really think it is so amazing what you said about just truly leaning into your unique experience and marketing that in how you put yourself forward and who you connect with. So thank you so much for bringing that. I know you had said too, you went back to school and you did your MBA, even though you already owned it.
Not an MBA. I got a master's in corporate and public communication.
Oh,
which
cool.
was
Okay.
perfect for me at the time.
Yeah.
Because I was already writing and speaking.
Very cool. So tell me, how did you, I know you said you wanted to lean into some skill sets, but I think this brings up a good point. Even as nurses, sometimes we're not super well educated on further education or where to go next.
Absolutely.
So how did you pick
And that is a
What do you
conundrum
recommend?
for many nurses. For 15 years, I wrote an advice column for a nursing magazine, and I would constantly get questions about higher education. Do I need to get more education? What major is going to pay me the most, or do I need? And my question was always, look at any possible majors, look at the coursework and curriculum, and you find one that is interesting and exciting to you and get that. With exceptions, which I'll get to, it almost doesn't matter what your major is when you get a graduate degree. If you want to teach nursing, yes, nursing education, that is important. But for a lot of us, for the average nurse, what that degree in is less important. I'm not talking about the requirement to have a BSN in magnet hospitals and things of that nature. Sometimes the actual major does matter, but in a lot of cases, especially those of us walking a different path, the major itself is less vital. I went to a diploma school of nursing. My undergraduate degree is in healthcare management. And when I looked at the coursework for that, it was very exciting and interesting to me. And I was a hospital director at the time. So I was studying healthcare marketing, healthcare communication, healthcare, finances. So I thought, wow, this is so interesting. I wish I had learned this years ago. So that worked very well for me. The corporate and public communication degree, when I saw the coursework and curriculum for that, and the way I got to that, I went out to a local chapter association meeting. The speaker that night was a professor from a local college. The reason I'm telling you the whole story. He told us about this brand new program in corporate and public communication. The college was starting in the fall. I looked at the brochure. I thought, this is right up my alley. It was about professional speaking, professional writing, all kinds of things like that. So the first point is, you never know what you're going to find out when you go out to an association meeting. That's another reason you have to get yourself out there. You never know where the spark, the idea, the information, the inspiration, the contact, the connection is going to come from. It won't happen if you're just sitting at home. And then this was a brand new graduate program. Talk about imposter syndrome. I thought, okay, if they're just starting this program in the spring, I better enroll now, because if I'm one of the first people to enroll, hopefully they'll just accept me. And then when I get in there, they'll say, push her through. She was like the first person to sign up, because I did not see myself as graduate school material. And I actually felt I almost had to trick them to accept me into grad school. Believe it or not, this is all true. And I did apply. I did get accepted. Finances are an obstacle in a lot of nurses' minds. There's so much scholarship money out there. I did not have the financial resources when I went, but I managed to get scholarship money. Not academic scholarships, other scholarships, and not all of them. I didn't have a nursing major. There's a lot of different types of scholarships. Where there is a will, there is always a way.
You're right, like leaning in, and it's a lot of what you're saying is just so much of thinking outside the box and, you know, being able to think through what you actually wanted and finding the path forward there. When you had mentioned as a nurse, and I have my MSN in education as well, that was the one path I kind of knew. But what was interesting is when I originally did my education degree, I thought, well, you become a nursing instructor. Like, that's what you do with this.
Right.
But it truly led me down a path of exploring things like simulation. I was a simulation nurse for years, and that was never in the forefront of my mind. So have you had experiences like that where you're like, I thought this was one thing and it turned into
Definitely.
something else?
Absolutely, because again, many nurses do not have the picture of the broad spectrum of opportunities. Many nurses think they should only be pursuing an MSN, and a lot of nurses think that if they're going to get an MSN, they're automatically going to become a nurse practitioner. They don't necessarily understand that the difference, and that you can get a graduate degree without becoming an advanced practice nurse. Some nurses feel the only way to advance in their career, some RNs, is to become an advanced practice nurse. Absolutely not the case. You know, I explained to them that that's an elevated level of practice and commitment on your part, but please talk to other nurses doing that before you make that decision to do that. Maybe that's great for you, but that's not an automatic to advance your career. In other words, a lot of different options. So yeah, lots of misinformation and lack of information about educational opportunities. I once, when I got out of that diploma school years ago, I was happy. I said, I will never be in a formal classroom again. But I am a huge proponent of higher ed today because of what it's done for me. When I was finished, as many people say, when you get any kind of degree, Donna, what are you going to do with that degree? I said, it's not what I'm going to do with that degree, it's what that degree has already done for me. Made me a better person, know more about myself, more about the world around me, and where I fit in. And I mentioned those benefits earlier. I say go back to school for yourself first in your career, second, if at all.
Oh, I love that. It really should serve you and serve your
Absolutely.
purpose.
And it does.
Oh, that is amazing. I know you've done a ton in your career that, you know, there wasn't a blueprint for you. So what were some of maybe the pitfalls that came forward, and how did you persevere through them?
Yeah, so I guess every new position I took was different from what I had done previously. So I had to rely on a core skill set that I took with me, because I had to learn a whole new job. I always had to learn a lot of new things when I went anywhere, but I would immerse myself in self-study. I would read and find out what I could. I would get on the phone and I would call other nurses or any healthcare professionals that I thought might be able to shed some light or had some related experience. I joined related professional associations and got active in those associations. So I really had to immerse myself in that whole world. When I left that hospital job that I had, that I mentioned where I first started to speak, health maintenance organizations and managed care was becoming big on the East Coast. And I saw that as, it was more than a trend at that point, but I felt compelled to learn more about it. And I thought the best way to learn is to get a job for a managed care company. And I did learn a lot. I didn't stay there for a long time, which is another story. But in the 6 months that I was in that position, I learned so much about healthcare reimbursement, about Medicare, about Medicaid. I learned about the cost of healthcare. I had no idea the cost of healthcare until I worked for an insurance company. It was very eye-opening, very educational. So it was another piece that I learned from that short position that I had.
Yeah, you're picking things up. And I do think it's interesting. I hear a lot of nurses have this fear of, well, what if it doesn't work out? I can't just come back, and I can't just spend 6 months somewhere. So tell me,
You mean come back like to the hospital,
Yes,
for example?
yes.
Yeah. So I initially thought that all the time. I thought, well, I can do whatever I want because I could always go back to the hospital. And maybe there was a time that was true. Decades ago, things didn't change quite as much as they do right now. Things change almost daily at this point in time. And yes, a lot of nurses fear leaving the hospital because they still are so attached to that base. First of all, they're afraid they'll lose their identity as a nurse, but being a nurse is about who you are, not about where you work. Yeah. Many ways and places to make a difference. It's possible, but there are a lot of positions in a hospital beyond that traditional bedside role today. Yeah. Oh my gosh, there are just so many different opportunities there. So it's not just those traditional roles. There's care management, there's case management. The list goes on and on of those opportunities that are there. But I always say to nurses, don't worry about whether you can go back, whether they'll hire you back, whether that's an option. You can't really, that becomes like a tether or a ball and chain kind of thing. How far away can I get from the hospital before, I lose my way or something like that. If you really want to get back at some point or there's a need, many nurses can integrate themselves back in, but there are always refresher courses and different things that a lot of nurses have taken over the years if they really want to do that. But you can't worry about that. You have to always be looking forward and trying something out. So what if I take a new job? I think this is what you were asking also, and I don't like it, for example. That's always a possibility. You never know. That job I had for 6 months, it wasn't that I didn't like the job. Once I got in there, I realized that it wasn't the right position for me. It actually wasn't, it was a position that I wasn't using my full skill set. It was, I really needed something with a bigger challenge. That was part of the reason that I left. But that's okay, because I learned so much in the 6 months that I was there. And, I was just able to move on from there. There's always other opportunities, other interesting things happening around the corner.
Yeah, and breaking through, it's not a failure to work somewhere for 6 months. You took so much from that. And I think you mentioned before, you worked in a psychiatric hospital and there was this fear of losing skills. But what I've been hearing you say a lot of is, but there's other skills you're learning from each of these roles.
So I worked in the psych hospital for 6 months. I really wanted to work in the emergency department. They didn't have an opening. I took the opportunity, remember, follow the opportunities in the psych hospital. And then after 6 months, there was an opening in the ER. I went back. Boy, did that psych experience come in handy working in the emergency department. So that's the thing. You take something from every place you are and you bring it to the next position, whether it's exactly the same type of position or not. You develop more personal skill set. You learn more about yourself and people. I was learning more about healthcare, and I always brought more with me to the next opportunity. And so then when I decided to start my education business and teach nurses about opportunities and marketing, I'd had so much experience, personal experience, but I also interviewed a lot of experts at the time.
Right. Saying yes really opened up more and more doors for you, even if you didn't know what exactly was behind that yes.
Absolutely.
Do you have any other, tips for kind of like finding that yes?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm glad you asked that, because yes is a very important question. It's become prominent. I didn't realize this years ago, but probably the very first time I agreed to do something that I don't even know why I said yes. When I worked for the Medical Weight Control Center, I was hired as a head nurse, which is, by the way, not the job that I interviewed for. I interviewed for a part-time staff position. I left with a head nurse position. I mentioned that earlier to you. Sometimes you may interview for one position and you leave with something else. So after I had worked there for a while, the owner of the company said to me, I would like you to take over managing the center. And I said to him, oh, I can't do that. I'm just a nurse. I remember my words exactly. because, you know, as a head nurse, I was drawing blood, taking EKGs. That seemed very nursey to me at the time. I said, oh, I can't do that. I don't know anything about marketing, human resources, you know, whatever. And he said to me, I understand your reluctance. He said, but I think you can do the job, and I want you to take the job. So first lesson before I get to yes, sometimes you have to, and this is Les Brown, the motivational speaker, said this, sometimes you have to believe in someone else's belief in you before your own belief kicks in. So
true.
I also had heard that if you're offered a promotion and you don't take it, you may never get that opportunity again. For that reason alone, not from a place of confidence or courage, I said yes. I no sooner said yes than I went home and went into a deep state of panic. Why did I say yes? What was I thinking? What was he thinking? I'm going to run his business into the ground. I truly, this is the imposter syndrome. Kicking
loud.
in full time, loud and clear. And I thought, okay, this was like on a Friday, and he wanted me to start on a Monday, which is a good thing, because if I had had more time to think about it, I probably would have figured out a way to back out. But I said yes reluctantly, went through the whole panic thing, and then I thought, okay, here I am. Now I need to start learning how to do this. And there were other women in the company that were in similar positions, so I started to observe them. I started to talk to them. I started to ask them for advice, and kind of figure out things along the way. So my five-part plan for success, MacKenzie, when an opportunity comes along, say yes. You go into a deep state of panic. What was I thinking? Why did I say yes? We all go through that. And then you start to change. You say, okay, let me get a grip. Let me figure out how to do this. And there's a lot of ways. You can do online research and education. You can talk to experienced people. Today, there's so much online that you can, and I'm not talking about AI or Chat GPT. I'm talking about real information that's out there. You figure out how to do it. You do it to the best of your ability. And then number 5 is the most important step. You celebrate having done what you did. So nobody's great at anything the first time they do it. How could you be, or would you be? But you have the opportunity, you do it to the best of your ability, and then you move forward from there.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And thank you for calling out. We have to celebrate, right? I think nurses in particular are really good at just kind of rushing through the pain point and then on to the next thing.
Yeah.
But
like,
it's
okay, did that, on to the next thing
yes,
now.
check.
We really minimize our contributions. We minimize our own skill set. And that's a common human trait, I guess, with a lot of people. We have a tendency to think of where we are and where we want to be, and we forget about how far we've already come. So I've long recommended that individuals, there are a couple of things that I recommend. First of all, sit down and start making a list of all of your lifelong accomplishments. And those are not just getting degrees or certifications, but maybe raising great kids or getting through a serious illness, tough situation in your life. And that can take some time. You start the list, but you want to continue doing the list. And then a colleague of mine says, after you do that, then you stand on the top of that mountain of experience that you have, and you relate to that. And I say, yeah, stand up there and just appreciate what you brought. That can help you break through imposter syndrome. So making a list. Another thing is to make a list of your strengths, the strengths that you're already aware of. I'm a good communicator, whatever it might be for you. I'm very good clinically, this and that, the things that you're aware of. But then it's also important to ask other people in your circle. It could be family or friends, coworkers. Tell them that you're working on a personal project and you would like to hear from them what they see as your gifts or what you do particularly well. Now, I always say if they have to think about it, then you're not talking to the right person. But usually people will give you some tips. And we're not necessarily aware of it. We all have gifts. We all have special gifts. But we don't see them as others do because they're so ingrained in us. They're so second nature to us. So you want to get that external feedback and write down that list. And then write down any positive things people have said about you. I started that when I started my business, and whenever I was really starting to doubt and question myself, I would go to that positivity journal, as I call it, and read those things that people had said to me. You're a good speaker, you're whatever, that just helps to kind of keep you going and moving forward. Those are just a couple of quick tips.
Yeah, the mountain of things is so fun to think about. You get to stand on the mountain of all you've accomplished, and it doesn't
stand
have
on the
to
top
be
of that
formalized.
mountain. Yep.
Nurses have, or even in my own experience, there have been times where I've gotten feedback that maybe wasn't so shining. And I think that definitely was an impedance to wanting to try something different. Like, well, I'm too loud on night shift.
Yeah,
Or how do you move through some of the feedback that maybe isn't so sparkling?
Yeah, so that, again, that's just part of human nature. Everything isn't all positive. It's not meant to be. We've all heard of the Asian philosophy of yin and yang, dark and light. Everything is positive and negative and dark and light. That's just the nature of the universe. So sometimes both positive feedback and negative feedback, you have to take it all with a grain of salt. Because let's say everybody's telling me I'm a great speaker, they love my seminars and what all. That's nice to hear, but I'm not going to assume that I am just universally accepted by everyone and everyone loves my style or the information or whatever. Negative feedback is important, but you also have to take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes people give negative feedback for their own personal reasons, but sometimes it's something you have to listen to. And if more than one person has said the same thing to you, that you are whatever, you're too loud. I said, we're talking about that because earlier we were talking about how I have a naturally loud voice. I'm from New Jersey, but I was very self-conscious about my voice my whole life until I began speaking, and people started to say to me, hey, your voice projects very well. I could hear you in the back of the room. That's a good thing. I thought, that's a good thing? I always thought my loud voice was a bad thing. So it gave me a new perspective on that. But I've certainly gotten a lot of feedback, and much of it is true. I've learned a lot of lessons the hard way, how to communicate diplomatically, how to communicate in a way that's not abrasive and all. I had a lot to learn in that regard, and many other things along the way. But it's good. You want to learn. You want to polish the parts that need polishing, and you want to kind of boost up the things that you do well. That's part of learning. But if you stay isolated and you don't go anywhere, you don't do anything, you're just not going to be aware of that. So sometimes people are afraid to get out in the world because they may get some negative feedback. But that's okay. You want to get out there and you want to do that. Let's find out. What are you good at and what do you need help with?
And your journey truly is like the perfect example of a lifelong learning journey. I know we talked a lot about formal education, but for listeners who are like, you know what, I don't have it in me, or even right now, like I'm too busy with kids and all the things, like how can they further their education, but maybe not in the formal or traditional pathway?
Absolutely. And formal, I'm glad you brought that up, because formal education is only one type of education. There's opportunities to learn everywhere. There's so much informal education. And I actually talked about how I did a lot of that. I went to the library, I did self-study. Nurses have so many continuing ed courses and opportunities today on all kinds of subjects, not just related to, let's say, their clinical specialty, because we do have a tendency to just stick with that clinical specialty, but branch out with your continuing education on communication skills, on running an effective meeting, on management and leadership skills. Management and leadership are things that you don't just naturally do that if you're put into a leadership position. There are a lot of skills and techniques that you learn, even in terms of communication and working with people. So branch out with your continuing education, with your informal education. Sure, focus on whatever your clinical specialty is, but see what else is out there. Anything that's interesting, follow that path. I have learned with informal education for myself. Sometimes I'm drawn to something, and I'm like, that sounds interesting, but why would I do that? What could I do with it? We're also always trying to do something concrete with everything we learn, not realizing that all types of learning values benefits us in so many ways. But I've learned now that if I'm drawn to something, if the title or the content interests me, then that's something I should just do. And it just enriches me in some way. And then when you learn something here, it's amazing how it finds a way to come up later. Like somebody maybe asks you to write an article about it, or it comes up in conversation and you have something to add to the conversation. So yeah, as nurses, we absolutely have to be lifelong learners. When you cease to learn, you cease to live, and we don't want to stop learning when we get out of a clinical setting or when we're 65 or when we're 80. We all learned about self-actualization in nursing school, Maslow's pyramid, and self-actualization is the innate human drive we have, all humans, to fully develop ourselves until we take our last breath, not until we so-called retire. And by the way, I tell nurses not to use the word retirement, just say you're in transition, because you never know what the road has ahead for you.
You're
Always
very,
different
very
opportunities.
right. Yeah, there really isn't a true retirement if you're always fulfilling new things. I will say I with one of my friends, went to an embroidery class, and one thing that was really interesting is one of the people there was a surgeon, and they said, like, when they got into their rotation, she's like, I was already really good because I
love that.
embroidery.
I love that.
So true that, I wouldn't have thought that was the takeaway, but you can get little pieces even from these informal places.
You can make connections with almost everything out there in life, and that's kind of interesting and exciting, really.
It is really exciting.
And the more you expand your world and get out there, the bigger and the more exciting your world becomes. And that's what we all want to strive for.
Absolutely. And I know we talked a little bit about, nurses get into nursing to care for people and to be that, bedside nurturer. But how did you bring those same passions and excitements about, helping someone at their time of need into your career as a nurse now?
Absolutely. So again, as I mentioned earlier, I've always had an expanded vision of who a nurse is and what a nurse does. So I never saw myself out of nursing. In fact, I think when I was working for the insurance company, my own mother was introducing me to her friend saying, this is my daughter, Donna. She used to be a nurse. I'm like, Mom, I had to be a nurse to get this job. But that mentality, I always saw myself as being a healer. The healing is at the core of everything I do, even today as a speaker and a writer. I think I mentioned earlier that I heal with words. There are many different ways to make an impact, whether you're working directly with patients or not. It all has an impact on the greater good, and we're all working toward the same thing. That's the thing. We're multidimensional, we're multi-talented. It's a great big healthcare world. There are many ways and places to make a difference, both direct and indirect.
I think a lot about that as we're just chatting today and thinking about, if one listener takes something away from this today, think about the rolling cadence of how that'll impact those around them, which is just so exciting. I know we talked a little bit about, nurses branching out, but I think one part of it that holds us back a lot is the dreaded resume.
Yeah. That's an important question because there's so much confusion about resumes. And there was a time that nurses did not need a resume. Those days are long gone. First of all, there's confusion about, we use CVs for curriculum vitae and resume. We use them interchangeably. They're really not the same thing, even though some people still use them interchangeably. Curriculum vitae is a long, very detailed document that really highlights a nurse's entire career from beginning to end. And that's used primarily in the academic setting, maybe if a nurse is going to be a publisher somewhere, that sort of thing. And it's good for nurses to create and keep a CV for themselves anyway, but that's not what's needed in the average job finding situation. Most nurses need a 2-page, what I call a business format resume. And it starts with not an objective. Objectives are old-fashioned. And if you say, I'm looking for a job in a maternity unit, you're applying for a maternity unit, I'm going to assume that's your objective. So instead, you start with a marketing statement that says a little bit about who you are, your personality, your background, experienced nurse with a background in this and that, works well with people, has a great sense of humor, that sort of thing. It's the first thing people read. This is like marketing 101, but this applies to nurses and their resume. It's the first thing they read. You want people to get interested and excited to read the rest of the resume because they may not otherwise. And then there's a lot of standards for resume writing. The resumes need to be in 12-point type size. If it's smaller than that, it's difficult to read. Many nurses believe their resume should be on 1 page. That is true of some industries, not of nursing. 1 page is okay if you're just getting started, but 2 pages is perfectly fine. You need to have white space around the edges. There's all science and research to this about how people, the reader, is focusing in and what they're picking up from the resume. I have seen nurses who think they have to have a resume on one page use up all the white space, like from left to right. And it's like, I don't know, it looks like busy wallpaper or something. It's not really helpful. So rather than using the old paragraph format, that's also out, we want to use something called a high impact reading format, where you're using a combination of bolded categories and then bullet points to highlight some significant accomplishments from a particular job. You don't want to put on your resume, I took vital signs, I picked up doctor's orders. Those are routine hospital type things. Everybody knows that's what nurses sometimes do. That's not the average nurse job description. But you want to talk about other things that you did. You worked on the schedule, you presented an in-service in this, you managed a budget of $500,000. The more interesting, exciting, marketable things on your resume you want to highlight with different positions. Now, if a nurse is newer, just starting out, first of all, long ago, nurses were told don't put any non-nursing experience on their resume. That's also outdated advice, because that can be very relevant, particularly if you're just starting out. Nurses who worked as a server in a restaurant, very heavily customer service, worked as a lifeguard, that's very relevant to nursing. Even sales. I've been telling nurses for years that we're all in sales, even though we don't think of ourselves as salespeople. We are always, every time we're trying to convince a patient to adhere to a regimen, or even a harder sell, convince a physician to change an order. Yeah, so all of those types of skills. But if a nurse is newer in the business and they don't have a lot of current experience in nursing, they can use some of that past jobs. And a newly licensed nurse, if they don't even have that or not much of that, they can list some of their clinical rotations, because perhaps they did a pediatric rotation at City General. Maybe they want to apply to City General for a position. That would actually look well. I have a lot of articles and things in more detail about that. We're talking about it in a very quick way. But so much misunderstanding and misinformation out there about resume writing. Every nurse should have a resume for themselves. And it's important to put, of course, you're going to put your education, associations, another reason to belong to associations, that should be on your resume also, definitely. And that shows that you're an informed, involved member of your profession when you belong to those associations.
Yeah. So outside of a resume, is there anything else that you're like, as a nurse, you have to have this?
Okay, so I highly recommend, so we've got the resume, we've got LinkedIn. I recommend every nurse have a business card made for themselves.
Okay.
Hard copy business card. Now, e-cards are popular with some people right now. There's a gazillion people that don't even know what an e-card is. An e-card is okay to have. It's something you have on your phone if you don't know what it is, and you can quickly exchange information. But a hard copy business card is a calling card, and you don't have to have a business or whatever. It's your professional contact information, your name, your credentials, a phone number, maybe your LinkedIn handle, which actually would be a good thing to put on your business card, so that when you're out, you never know who you're going to meet where. You don't want to just meet people and say, hi, nice to meet you, great, yeah, nice, whatever, nice event. You want to be able to exchange that information so that when you get back, you can go online and look at their LinkedIn profile. You can maybe send them an email follow-up, great to meet you. If you ever decide you want to work on that project we discussed about nurses on boards, I would love to work with you on that. So you start to build your community in that way. So those are some essential marketing tools that all nurses need.
Very cool. Well, talk about social networking, but leveled up, having a business card and all those things.
Absolutely.
So for
and
people,
MacKenzie, anybody who's anybody has a business card, and every nurse is somebody.
I love that. Every nurse is somebody. So for those of us who are maybe not super savvy, do you have any resources or any recommendations for where we could go to get a business card made, or even a resume template?
Oh,
things
absolutely.
Like that?
Well, first of all, you can get a business card made almost anywhere. Very easy. I don't recommend printing them yourself on your computer, because the paper is flimsy and whatnot. You can go to any online printers or local print shops, and they'll have templates and colors and fonts and whatnot you can pick out. You just get something very basic and professional looking. I do have some resume templates in some of my career books. You have to be careful with that also, and I'm glad you brought that up, because there are so-called professional resume writers out there, and many of them are not nurses. They have no background in healthcare, and they write a lot of those bullet points, like it picked up doctor's orders, took vital signs, because they're not aware of the full scope and breadth of what nurses do. So if you're going to find someone to help you craft a resume or help you, coach you through the process, at least look for someone who has a nursing background, who has that understanding of the profession to do that. But I always recommend that nurses do their own resume. It's very empowering. If you have the right tools, I have some instructional material available. I highly encourage you to work on it yourself, because nobody's ever going to write a better resume for you than you yourself.
That is so cool. I update my resume every year in December, so I'm gonna have to get into your resources they have available to do it this next time.
Definitely.
So will you tell us more about where people can find those resources, how to connect with you?
Sure, thank you. So the one book that I have a lot of sample forms, and I go step by step through networking and resume writing, is my book, The Ultimate Career Guide for Nurses, second edition, that's out right now. And a lot of nurses wanted those resources. They needed to see samples. So I have sample for students, for new nurses, seasoned nurses, and even samples of CVs. And everything is step by step, just spelled out in there, so you have that. If you go to my website, donnacardillo.com, click on the nurses tab, there's a lot of free articles there. And the articles are all categorized, so there are some articles specifically about resume writing, about interviewing. I certainly recommend going to the interview section if you have an interview coming up. Again, with interviewing, there's a lot of, nobody should be winging it when they go on an interview. I didn't know this in the early days. I was winging a lot of things in the beginning. There's a lot of technique involved in interviewing. Most interviewers, they've been asking the same questions for a long time. And I always say it's not a confessional, it's a self-marketing situation. You know, if an interviewer says, what's your worst trait? You don't want to truly tell them what your worst trait is, that could be, I don't know, I'm always picking scabs on my face. That's not what you want to bring up in an interview, for example. There are ways to answer those questions that are professional and that are going to directly relate to the position that you're applying for. And so there's a lot to learn and to study to be able to market yourself well. Years ago, our clinical skills and license were enough. That's long gone. We have to learn to market ourselves, articulate our value, talk about what we do, have those marketing tools, build that professional network. Those are all important tools. Even if you think, I'm going to stay in this job for the rest of my career, you might want to, but that job may not exist for the rest of your career. Besides which, 2 years from now, things could change in your life and you decide you want to go in a different direction. When you create that resume and even that LinkedIn profile, you're also saying, hey, wow, look at what I've done. Look at where I've been. It's, it accompanies that list of accomplishments that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, a great way to just continue the journey, continue the story.
Yes.
And you never know when you're going to need it, even
Absolutely.
if you never plan to.
This is an excellent point, because I hear a lot of nurses say, well, I'm not looking for a job. Okay, great, but you may get a consulting opportunity, or somebody might say, hey, I'm working on a research project. Would you co-author that with me? Can I see your resume? You don't want to run home and scramble to try to figure out how to do that. That's an excellent, excellent point. Yes, It's not just for job finding.
No, never. And I think we do so much in our lives, as you talked about, you throughout your year, you might do 5, 6 different things. And it's nice to be able to keep track of those things.
Oh, definitely.
Rather than trying to rapid fire do it, a capture of the last decade.
Definitely. I remember, I think I was doing my first resume years ago, and that was after I had worked in that medical weight control center. And I put it together and I read it to my husband. And he said to me, I read him what I wrote about the medical weight control center. And he said, well, what about the fact that, you were approached to open a second center for them and you researched the real estate and this and that. I said, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I mean, it's like this huge thing, but we just push it in the back of our mind. And I was focusing on all the kind of, routine things that I was doing. So that's why resume writing is a really good exercise also, because it helps you to keep on top of your professional accomplishments and your body of experience. You don't want to suddenly have to recall 5 or 10 or 15 years of things because you're not likely to remember them all or remember them well.
Correct. And you don't want to lose those beautiful nuggets of things that you've captured along the way.
Absolutely.
And I just so appreciate that you have resources available, because sometimes we just need a place to start.
Definitely.
So it's fantastic.
And all these things help to combat imposter syndrome also, because when I looked at that first resume, I thought, wow, I've really done a lot of things. Even when I went back to the emergency department, I used to volunteer for extra assignments all the time. Not because I saw it as a great way to promote myself or my career, but my manager would come in and say, I need somebody to take over writing the schedule or something. And I'd always say, I'll do it. And my coworkers were happy that I volunteered. I volunteered because I thought it changed things up for me. I wouldn't have to be in the ER, all those hours. I could go do some other work or whatever. But when I left the ER then years later, and I listed all those things, I thought, wow, I've really had a lot of amazing experiences. And again, all of those things develop critical mass.
Yeah, it's just like a culmination. What a cool thing to look back on, as you continue to move through your career and evolve. So I would love to see your resume truly, and just to take a glimpse behind the curtain. Thank you so much for your time here today. It's been so exciting. For the listeners, if they want to further connect with you, I know you said you have social medias. Where's the best place for people to connect with you, find you, engage with you?
Thank you. So my website is very complicated. You might want to write it down. It's donnacardillo.com. That's my website, and I'm everywhere on social media except TikTok. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, all over. I post something every day that's uplifting, educational. I encourage us all to become part of the same nursing community. That's important. It's nice to know people online. And again, I really want to leave with all nurses that nursing is a big, incredible field. There's so many ways and places to make a difference. I encourage every nurse to be adventurous, try new things, go on interviews, try some new things, just learn and grow and keep moving forward. It's amazing the opportunities that are out there.
Well, I want to thank you again, Donna, for joining us. Please go and follow Donna on all the socials. I know I am going to. And just thank you for your time and your expertise.
Oh, my pleasure.
And thank you for joining us today at Elite Learning. We really appreciated your time. If you would like to subscribe to us on YouTube and follow along, we have tons of podcast topics with CEs available. We'll chat with you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope this conversation brought you valuable insights to elevate your practice. As a quick reminder, the content you heard today featured an accredited educational activity provided by Colibri Healthcare. Please visit elitelearning.com/podcasts to review all accreditation and disclosure statements. You'll also find simple instructions on how to earn your CE credits for this episode. Take your learning to the next level by hitting the subscribe button. Stay tuned for more thought-provoking healthcare topics designed to inspire and expand your expertise. Keep learning, keep growing, and we will catch you next time.